In this week's training focus, we're going to talk about identifying a deceased person. You know, when you work a case, one of the most important things that you need to do, of course, is to identify the person. And you might think, well, obviously that goes without saying, but there can be some nuances and some things you need to possibly consider. Having proper identification is important for several reasons. One, it verifies the person is dead. So until you can positively identify that person, then that person isn't actually dead. And once you can identify them as that person, then it allows for the next of kin to be notified. If you have an John Doe or Jane Doe, an unknown body, of course, you haven't identified them, then you can't even notify their next of kin who is probably looking for and or worrying about them. And then, of course, it assists in criminal and civil cases. You can't proceed with a criminal case or a civil case without that person being positively identified. Now, I do know there are times the court can rule somebody dead if they've been missing for a long period of time, and possibly then a criminal case could go forward. But those normally take years, and we're looking to do something, identification, pretty well on the scene or soon thereafter. And there are three categories of identification. There's unidentified, presumptive, or maybe a tentative identification, and third, positive identification. Now, one of the most popular, common form of identification is visual. In most cases, you rely on possibly a witness in their area saying that is my dad. You might have a police officer who knows the person. There may be other things such as a driver's license, something like that. So visually, you can determine that the person you have lying there on the floor is in fact John Smith. But be very cautious about this because that can at times come up with a wrong conclusion. Maybe the person has been dead for maybe a couple of days and there's some postmortem changes and the person looks similar to John Smith, but it's not John Smith. Maybe even the witnesses that are there saying it's John Smith is lying to you. And there's a reason why they want you to believe that is John Smith. Well, there's some other ways to also come up with a presumptive identification, such as scars, marks, tattoos of a person. Is that person in a familiar surrounding? So is John Smith in John Smith's bed in John Smith's locked home, and the other person that lives with him is the wife? Usually, we will say that is John Smith. Are there pictures on the wall of Mr. and Mrs. Smith and their grandchildren, or however the case may be? If you've got somebody that's walked off from a nursing home or something like that, and they've got a height, a weight description, a race, clothing, all of those things can be used as a presumptive identification as well. And how many presumptive identifications do you need to make a positive identification? Well, that's going to be subjective. That may vary. But if you've got some surgical scars, if you've got some very, very unique tattoos, things like that, then you may have enough presumptive methods that you can say, well, I'm going to say that this is positively John Smith. And if you're looking at scars or tattoos, you can also look at family photos of who you believe this person might be, see if those scars or those tattoos show up. Jail records. Many times jail records will take photographs of tattoos. Sometimes they only say tattooed left upper arm, which doesn't help you. If they have Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of those social medias where they've got pictures of themselves on there or other people have pictures of your deceased, then you might see scars or tattoos that match your victim. And of course, there's medical records. Maybe you can get a determination of the surgical scars match the person. There could be implants that you can find the numbers on the implants and match it to their medical records. Now, there is no database to track. If you have an implant in someone like a hip replacement or a knee replacement, you can't take that number and then run it through a database and say, oh yeah, that's John Smith. Now, if you think it's John Smith, then you can generally get the medical records for John Smith for that knee replacement and then match that up, or whatever the case may be. but there's no central record for that except sometimes in most cases for breast implants, but that's for something different. Be careful about tattoos. Tattoos that are very unique or seem to be specific to that person, then we're good with that. But if you're around the military base and it's a military style tattoo, there could be thousands of women who have gotten that tattoo. But is it something unique? Maybe it's got their child's name on it, or maybe it's some very, very distinct artwork or something that is just presents something in their life. Well, you can use that as a pretty high presumptive. But again, tattoos can be repeated. People can go into a tattoo parlor and look through a book and pick something out and then have that tattoo. And if it happens to be on the left upper arm of two different people or more, that is only a presumptive. That cannot be used as positive identification. And then you've got piercings. If your victim, it has certain piercings, whether it be ears, lips, nose, eyebrows, or any other part of their body. Again, presumptive. You can't say just because he has a nose ring that's him or her, but certainly it is something that if you have a tattoo that matches, you have maybe piercings that match, maybe even scars or marks, like birthmarks. Maybe there's a certain birthmark that looks like Italy, or there's 3 moles on the right shoulder in a row, or something like that, which is very, very unique. Again, it's presumptive, but enough presumptives can certainly lead to what you might consider a positive. Now, when all of that fails, then you have to go to scientific identification. Maybe they're too decomposed to get any of that. Maybe you can't even do fingerprints. Facial recognition is totally off the table because of decomposition, or maybe it's the body's badly burned. Anything like that, you will have to go to a scientific method, okay? Or another case, let's say there's multiple deaths in one location. If you can't readily identify each person, if you have multiple deaths, we've all heard that story of where 2 girls were in a car accident, one died, one lived, but one of them was sharing another one's ring or something like that. They looked close enough together that, anyway, they buried the wrong family, buried the wrong child, and it was a horrible thing. So we got to be double, triple sure that we have the right person. So what are some scientific methods? Of course, there's fingerprints. If the body is able to be fingerprinted, then that certainly can be checked. DNA. Now, fingerprints probably going to be your fastest. DNA, it may take some time, but you could extract DNA, and then you could get a possible family member and send that have it matched. That's really good. Dental identification. That doesn't take too awfully long as you've got some good dental records from a recent past. If you've got dental records from 10 years ago or from when they were a teenager and now the guy's 35, well, it just might not be enough there because there might have been some changes that are not documented in the dental records. But certainly if you have something recent, those help really well. We talked about medical devices already. If they have a knee replacement, they have a hip replacement, then that isn't necessarily exact, except if you think you know who it is, pull the medical records. Then if you also have somebody that you think you know who it is, and they've got pins and plates from a car accident, maybe on their femur and their head or whatever, and you've got x-rays of that, then you can look at the x-rays of the person you have now and match those up. That's a good way. So sometimes it's just a conjunction of a lot of these things to be able to get proper identification. Now, a word of warning, never use false teeth. False teeth, many of them, I assume all of them, I don't know that, but many of them have the person's name imprinted in the false teeth. The problem with that is people can share teeth, and I know that sounds horrible, but they certainly can share teeth. There are cases where people have died in a nursing home or whatnot, and the teeth have not went with the body, and someone else has gotten the teeth. Sometimes people get new dentures and they donate the old dentures to people that might not otherwise be able to afford them. There are reasons why somebody might have somebody else's teeth. Now, generally, of course, they're fitted to your jaw and your mouth, but there are times that they can fit somebody else, just like a lot of times you can donate eyeglasses and they'll find some people to wear your eyeglasses that closely match their prescription. So teeth if you have false teeth, you just absolutely cannot say, yes, that is this person. So be careful about that. And then, of course, if you have no identification, if you've got DNA, you've got no matches, then be sure that you enter them into NamUs, enter them into CODIS, and so that if someone is reported missing or you have another case or some other department has a case, those things can be matched. So if you have an unidentified person, be sure to list them in NamUs and CODIS, and you can get access to that pretty easy, and you can get that uploaded. So identification is easy, but it isn't always simple. You have to be sure that you are saying this person is John Smith, and you have to be able to rely on your investigation and your summary to say that. And if you can, that's great. If you find out later that you're wrong, because somehow new evidence has came up, then your report needs to be in such a way that a common person can say, well, I see that we have these marks and these tattoos and these piercings, and he was in John's bed, and, he had a beard like John. And I mean, here are 6, 7, 8, 9 things that presumptive that you considered it to be John. So you're wrong. We know this now 2 years later, but we know now that at least you made a good effort. And most of the time you won't be wrong, because if you're not sure, you just won't identify them. You'll leave them as unknown. But be sure that you use the proper methods and document the methods you use for identification. So if there's ever a question, that is documented. It's ever so important. And you'll find that out if you ever have a case where a year or two later, you realize it's the wrong person.